Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And tonight's guest is Preston Dennett. Now, Preston's been on a number of times. And like I was telling him just prior to the show, the reason he's on a lot, number one, he writes a lot of books on this subject. I think this is his 20th book. And two, he's a great guest. A lot of people, when they write a book, they don't want to give too much of it out. Well, Preston doesn't have that problem. He tells in depth of some of these stories, which are quite incredible. The book he has is called Wondrous. It's 25 True UFO Encounters. And there's some really bizarre ones in this one. It's a book a lot of people are buying already. And so check that out. That link is in the show notes, as always. And next week we have Zen Benfidel. I don't know exactly how to say his last name. And he's been in touch with me since I started the show. Now we're up to 460 shows at this point. And speaking of shows, you can't miss one coming up if you like this topic. In particular, the Berkshire's UFO incident. Unsolved Mysteries really kind of opened up the door on that as far as showing all the different witnesses and all that. Well, that particular episode made a few people come forward that had kept it to themselves over the years. Well, coming up on July 6th, we're going to have a 3-hour special, not 5, starting at 5:00 p.m. Eastern time. And that's going to be right at the Warner farm in the Berkshires, at Tom Warner's fifth generation home, where the incident actually happened to him when he was a child, I think 9 years old or around that age. So we're going to be doing it right there. Hopefully we won't get abducted while we're doing it, or something like that will happen. But we're going to be doing it right on location. If the weather's fine, we're going to be outdoors around a campfire. I know it's going to be light, but we're still going to be around that. We're going to have some amazing people there. I can't really announce the names yet because one person in particular may or may not come. If she's feeling well, she will come. And so it's going to be a great one when we have someone flying up from the south that has never talked about it before. We have 2 people that have never talked about it before that have decided to come forward since the Unsolved Mystery episode came out. So that'll be July 6th. Don't miss it. Again, we'll be on location right in the Berkshires, right where it happened. So our guest tonight, Preston Dennett. Again, now I believe it's his 20th book. It's always great having him on. Before I bring him on, though, I want to talk quickly about the blog. It's the Aguilera UFO in Puerto Rico that Robert Powell and so many people on the SCU had done some great research on. That's the blog this week. And we are ready to go. I'm going to add our guest right now. Preston, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Preston, you've been on, I think this is probably your 5th time you've been on this show. And you're always fun to have on, and you keep the show really interesting. Can you tell I know you started your UFO interest back in 1986, but there are some people that are just not familiar with it, with you, because as I mentioned almost every show, every week we have new listeners. I get a lot of email from people that are just starting to pay attention to this topic because it's in the news so much. So if you would, please give your background and what got you interested in the topic to begin with.
Yeah, that's awesome to see more and more people getting interested in this subject. I hated it. I was not interested in UFOs at all. I did not want to hear about it. I was a pretty young guy, 1986. I was 21 years old. I remember it vividly, the day it happened, November 17, I think it was. I was watching the news with the family, and a report came on about a sighting over Alaska. It's now a very famous case, JAL Airlines. 2 giant walnut-shaped UFOs paced Captain Kenju Chiroshi's aircraft for many miles. It was on their onboard radar. It's a great case. But on the news report, they just kind of joked about it, laughed nervously, said a few kind of ridiculing comments, and moved on. But I remembered my brother had said he'd seen a UFO some years earlier, 7 or 8 years before this. So I went up to Mark, my brother, and said, "Hey, Mark, tell me about that UFO you said you saw." and he told me this incredible story about how he and his two friends chased this metallic craft, colored lights, little dome on top, the whole deal, for several miles. Other people were watching it too. He's like, you don't believe me? Call my friends, Phil and Greg. I ended up calling both of them. And this kind of started the snowball rolling. Found out my sister-in-law had had a sighting. Later had a face-to-face encounter with gray ETs. Another sister-in-law had encounters. I had several friends who had really close-up encounters. One had missing time. Actually, two, now that I think of it. And I brought it up at work. Big mistake. Diane, someone I'd worked with for years and years, starts telling me about this amazing sighting she had with her whole family, this star-like object darting around, which was up in the San Bernardino Mountains, Southern California. And they ended up having more encounters at their home in Reseda. And her daughter started being visited by gray ETs. And so Diane's telling this story, and in walks Dorothy. And she's like, oh, UFOs. One followed us home from the library, me, my mom, and my best friend. And she's like, Preston, it's so weird. We live 5 minutes from the library. We left at 9 o'clock, right when the library closed. And it followed us home the whole way, darted off. And when we looked at the clock, it was 10:15. I have no idea what happened at the time. It only takes us 5 minutes to get home. So she had missing time. And yeah, that's how it kind of all started. I was not a happy camper, I can tell you that.
And what did you do? What was your first action at that point, as far as looking into it, trying to figure it out?
I went to bookstores and the library. I'm like, I'm going to disprove these guys. It's clearly swamp gas. I kind of knew they weren't lying. It was clear they weren't misperceiving. So I was a little bit between a rock and a hard place.
But did you try to get more information from them? Just trying to,
not initially. No. No, this wasn't easy for me. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. I could not wrap my head around the idea that aliens were here. I assumed the stars were too far away. I assumed that UFOs were seen by uneducated people, by one person at a time. Almost every single person I talked to pretty much everyone had witnesses with them. In fact, they all did. Every single one of these people had other people with them. And I was ready to disprove it, and I couldn't. I was shocked instead to find out that this was a subject taken very seriously for decades. There was mountains of evidence. There was a cover-up. That shocked me. It took me a year or two to really take this in a way that, I'm still struggling with it, to be honest. I just cannot let the subject go.
Well, okay. So let's talk about your book on that you just wrote and the title of it, and how did you choose these 25 separate cases?
Yeah, well, I'm super excited about this book because these are all my own cases. These are cases that no one's heard before. They're unpublished till now. And some of these are cases I've wanted to include for quite a while. What I did for this book is I wanted to choose cases that I think have something to contribute to our understanding of this phenomena. Cases that are more extensive than just a simple sighting. Cases with a lot of credibility, multiple witnesses, good witnesses, and a wide variety. I wanted to include, not just one type of encounter. So I've got some really interesting sightings with telepathic contact. Got a few interesting landing cases. I love landings because there's no chance of misperception when you're like right up next to one of these things. Also some whistleblower accounts, some government whistleblower accounts. A few that I've sat on for a while, just didn't have room in some of my other books. My favorite, of course, are cases of face-to-face contact or people who are taken on board. I think we've got a lot of pay dirt in those types of cases. And what else? Oh, yeah, one really interesting USO account, unidentified submersible object, because I've done a lot of research into that, wrote a whole book on that, and continue to get cases. In this one case, wow, it's just bizarre and unique. I've never heard anything quite like it.
And so these are great because these are all like, apparently these are going to be first time heard cases, basically, right? Is that what you're basically saying?
Yep, yep. I mean, a few of them did report to a website here or there. Like one lady did report her case to MUFON. But yeah, these are all unpublished, never appeared in a magazine or anything or book. So yeah, I'm
Well,
confident that no one's heard of any of these stories.
well, let's hear about, starting out, if you wouldn't mind. Let's hear about that USO case. Those always intrigue me.
Yeah, yeah. Here, let me get the date for you because so many cases, it's hard for me to keep them straight. But this one, love this case. It has 3 witnesses. I talked to 2 of them. Joy Williams and her husband Tom are the main witnesses. There's a 3rd witness, and this took place in August of 1997. They went out to dinner at their friend's house. She invited them over to her house for dinner, and her house, well, both of their houses, but her house overlooks the Monterey Bay. This is a really beautiful area on the coast of Central California. And Monterey Bay is really, really deep, by the way. That might be a factor here. At any rate, they enjoyed the dinner, and that, after dinner, Joy decided to go out on the deck to just look at the view. It's a really beautiful view of the bay. The water's about a quarter mile away, and they're high on a hill, and she's looking down and sees this glow in the water, this bright yellow, kind of yellow-green glow. And lo and behold, it's getting brighter and brighter, and this object comes emerging out of the water. And she can see it clearly. It's covered in kelp, seaweed, kind of just streaming off the sides of it. The water's streaming off the sides and comes up out of the water 50, 100 feet or so. It's clearly pretty large because at a quarter of a mile away, she can see it's a sizable object. And it's just hovering there. She calls out her husband, Tom, her friend, and they all see it. She's a military brat, by the way. She knows her aircraft pretty well, has never seen anything like this, never had a UFO sighting before this. None of them have. And they have a telescope on the deck. So they immediately go to the telescope and look at this thing through the telescope. They can see it has portholes around the whole circumference, large kind of oval portholes with alternating, I think it was yellow and red, yellow and green. And, they're pretty far away. They didn't hear any noise. So they couldn't really say whether or not this thing was making noise. But as they watch it, this thing starts to meander along the coastline, making a beeline, really, for the Moss Landing coal power plant. This is located right on the shoreline there. And it has 2 really tall, 200-foot tall smokestacks right next to each other. And this thing goes straight for these smokestacks and parks right alongside the top of one of the smokestacks and just stays there. So they're freaking out. The host was really upset, but they were all sort of freaking out about this. They all felt like it was watching them, that it knew they were observing it. That made him a little nervous. And here's where it just went from strange to truly bizarre. And I've never heard of anything like this. I'm not sure what to make of it. Because I do have cases, and I know of many cases where UFOs have hovered over power plants, nuclear power stations, dams, electrical power stations. So that's not unusual. And that's exactly what was happening here. But this thing starts to emit what I can only call an arm, or a sort of, an arm, I guess, a metallic arm out the far side, which sweeps over the craft itself and into the very top of the smokestack.
Wow.
Very strange. Yeah, and it has a pair of like a claw or pincers. And she can tell, she knows how big this smokestack is. So she estimates that this craft is anywhere between 50 and 100 feet wide and the pincers themselves have to be at least 20 feet long. So this is big. And it starts digging into the top of the smokestack. Very strange. I don't know if it's put it right. I mean, just bizarre.
Well, they have a lot of them have these like filters and things. I'm not sure exactly what, but like some of the smoke is like treated through filters. And I don't know where they're located in the chimneys, but I'm wondering if they're at the top. Do you know what type of, was this an oil or coal fired plant?
Yeah,
Do you know?
Yeah, it was coal. Yeah.
Coal. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it was placing something in there, because there are cases. I mean, that happened at the Morenci copper smelting plant. A UFO hovered right over one of the smokestacks and dropped a little probe right into it. They didn't see that, but it was doing something. I kind of speculate that maybe it was measuring the levels of pollution, because that's something a lot of contactees get, messages about. Like, why are you polluting your planet? Why are you using fossil fuels?
Yeah.
This type of thing.
Yeah.
So maybe it was investigating that.
Wow.
I mean, clearly it was.
That's a fascinating one.
Yeah, they called the police while it was there. They called the police, and the policeman was very friendly at first until it became clear to him that this was a UFO report. And then he became hostile. Yeah, he did not want to hear it. He says, "Oh, you're just looking at a fishing boat."
Yeah.
Yeah, that angered them both. We're like, it's in the sky. It's not a boat. It's
now,
what about in the air?
What about the plant? Was there anyone that reported seeing anything at the plant, or did they try to reach someone at the plant to talk to them when it was going on? And can you remind me, how long did it stay there?
It stayed there anywhere between 10 to 20 minutes, and it took a good 15 minutes to get there. So this is a fairly prolonged sighting. And it stayed there long enough for them to call the police. This is something a lot of people should have seen. But they called the radio station. They did not call the power plant, but they did call the radio station afterwards and asked if there were any reports. The radio host denied it. But that doesn't surprise me. Most people do not report their sighting. This is the one case that she did report it to MUFON, did submit a written report. And I did some, it stayed there for like 20 minutes and winked out. I did not see it move away. It didn't fade away. Just blink and it's gone. So maybe it darted off. These things can move quickly.
Yeah.
Or maybe it turned invisible, because, I do have reports where some people are seeing a UFO and other people in the area aren't seeing it, and they should be able to. So they can kind of show themselves to who they want to. Maybe this was an intentional, kind of display, because that does happen. I don't know, but I did some digging and I found something really interesting. This was not the first sighting there, and it wasn't the last either.
Really? At the same power plant?
Yep. I think the most interesting other sighting occurred some years later. Not long after that, a couple of years, and it was by a security officer who was patrolling that area, and he saw this. He described it as an orb, a white orb, but again, it was hovering directly over the power plant. He saw it twice over a period of hours on one evening. But I found two other reports as well. So yeah, Moss Power Plant is being targeted by UFOs. I think they're, keeping tabs of our technology, monitoring pollution, something along these lines. I can only speculate, but power plant visitations is definitely a thing. But never heard anything where they're like digging into it with this giant claw. That's weird.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that really makes you wonder if they were taking samples, and if so, why. Could have to do with pollution, the amounts of pollution. If you want to speculate, you could also speculate, well, this could be a time travel thing, testing what we're doing at a certain time or whatever, or the way it blinked off like that. You'd almost wonder if there was the dimension thing that people talk about, But then why would they be in the water if that's the case? You know what I mean?
Yeah, they clearly had an agenda. I mean, that was their plan. And I talked about this with Michael Schratt, who
Yep.
is another, fairly prominent researcher who's done a lot of research into the shapes of UFOs and stuff. And
Right.
he's like, he agreed with me. He's like, I've never heard anything like this at all. He called it one of the most unusual things he's heard. And I agree with him. It's that arm that really gets me. I'm like, what the heck? And why did it come out the far side? And come over the object.
Since they had all this time, were they able? And this is 1997. I realized that when the cell phone technology didn't really have the camera capabilities like it does, but did they have access to either a video camera or a camera, and did they try to take pictures?
No to both questions. Did not take pictures. Did not have a camera handy. And following the incident, one of the witnesses, the host, where they had dinner, refused to discuss it. She did not want to talk about it ever again. It really upset her. I think it kind of shifted her worldview quite a bit. And it took, so she's now deceased, unfortunately. So I couldn't talk to her, but it clearly shifted her worldview to a point that she was not happy talking about it. And no photos, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's too bad. You wonder if that would happen today. You would think someone would be able to capture a really good video of it. And I realize a quarter of a mile is very far away, but it sounds to me like when it went over to the power plant where they could have been able to film something or taken some pictures if they had that availability.
Yeah, it's funny. I've talked to people I've talked to people who have had cameras ready and didn't think of them, or tried to take a picture and just for whatever reason weren't able to do it, or the camera actually fails. And I had one case on Catalina Island. There were 12 people there, and 4 of them had cameras, and every single camera failed. So did their flashlights and their watches too. So
you hear that a lot. Like the batteries will die, things like that suddenly, which is really bizarre. And I think back of when I had my sighting. I don't know if I had my phone beside me if I would have even thought of taking a picture. I was just so engulfed in what I was seeing. Like, what am I looking at? Like,
yeah. I had the same experience. I went out looking for UFO. Well, this lady, a contactee, took me on an appointment to see a UFO. I wasn't really expecting one, even though she kind of had showed me one earlier. But we went out to this location, and this giant UFO showed up. It was right next to us. I mean, 50 feet away. The most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I was covered with golden lights and had a camera around my neck. Did not take a picture. I didn't think of it. It was just so shocking when you see this that close. And it was a brief sighting too, so please give me credit for that. It was like 20, 30 seconds.
Did you try to go back to this place? I mean, is this how did this happen? I want to know how this happened. Did she tell you that she had sightings in a particular place quite often? Come along with me. Is that what happened?
No, this is actually a really interesting story. I had interviewed her about her, onboard experiences, her face-to-face encounters, and they were wild. I mean, this was one of the most extensive cases I had up to that time, complete with hybrid babies, and like she was being pulled up into a craft once, woke up, and saw the Greys. They were very surprised that she woke up, and she says to them, "Put me back right now." They were so surprised they did. Another time she woke up, they were surrounding her bed, and she lashed out and kicked one in the neck, and it snapped, and it fell down. And she thinks she may have actually killed it. She's not sure. She feels really bad about it, but that stopped that whole experience. So she's telling me all this. I did a recorded interview, and I'm in my condo. This is mid-1990s, 94. And in my condo in Canoga Park, late at night, transcribing the interview. And I'm like, I wonder if Wendy, I'll call her Wendy, is for real. I mean, I know she is. She's clearly sincere. But I just couldn't wrap my head around all this. And I got this really strong, literally irresistible impulse to go onto the roof of my condo. And I couldn't stop myself. And I'm like, what am I doing? I grabbed my glasses. I'm slightly nearsighted. I use them for driving. And ran onto the roof of my 3-story condo, which I'm not allowed to do. And I don't go up there. It's against the rules. I'm a good boy. I don't disobey the rules. But I did that night and walked onto the roof. I'm facing north thinking, what am I doing? And I wasn't up there, I'm going to say about 10, 15 seconds. It could have been 30, but it was less than a minute. And this object appears, well, a light, this giant glowing kind of fiery orange orb right across the street. Could have been maybe, I don't know, 100, 200 feet away, but 10 feet across, maybe. It was big. And this thing talks to me. I mean, it literally gave me a message. It blew me away. I've never had anything like this, but it basically said, not in English, but in sort of just a blast of impressions. It's like, hi, it's us. We're Wendy's ETs. You don't believe? Well, watch this. Not in words, but just a really strong impression that was unmistakable. And it starts darting around back and forth, back and forth. I mean, not only right angles, but super acute angles. Really fast. And just putting on a display clearly for me to convince me that Wendy was telling the truth. And it convinced me. I couldn't believe it. I fell back against the wall there and I'm like, oh my God. And it was, again, a brief sighting. I ran downstairs. It was too late to call her. I almost did, but I don't think I called her that night. I called her the next day. I'm like, Wendy, you're not going to believe it. Your ETs came and they actually talked to me. She's like, wow, I told you I was telling the truth. What, you didn't believe me? I'm like, no, it's not that I didn't believe you. I'm just having trouble, wrapping my head around this. And I told her I'd really like to see a UFO. And she says, well, you just saw one. I'm like, yeah, but I wasn't ready. Well, I wasn't ready for it. She's like, okay, I'll talk to them telepathically. I'm like, you can do that? And she's like, sure, I'm in telepathic contact with them. She has fully conscious experiences. And that's what she did. She called me up like 2 weeks later. She says, okay, they said they'd appear. It's off the 210 freeway in Pasadena. Let's go. You ready? I'm like, yeah, let's do this. And it worked. Yeah, I brought my sister-in-law, my nephew, and her. And only she and I saw it. My sister-in-law, Christy, and my nephew, James, had fallen behind on the path up this little mountain alongside the freeway. But
wow.
Right when we got there, I mean, literally the second we got there, it appeared. I was shocked.
That is really something. I'm going to just show you this comment by Jennifer P. I'm in the oil industry and work the night shift at refineries in the U.S., and many of us see unusual lights hovering above the units we're repairing. Most of the guys don't talk about it. Scares them. Interesting. Thank you, Jennifer, for that.
Yeah, that's just irks me. I mean, I understand it, but that people don't talk about this. That's why, I mean, we know MUFON, Newfork get 20 reports daily about, on average. And if let's say it's 1 in 10 people reporting it. And that's
right. Yeah.
That's being generous. It's probably closer to 1 in 100.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's well, just when I went to a conference once, it ended up being about 1 in 10. When how many people sitting here right now think they saw a UFO, the show of hands, and then counted, it was about 10% that reported it. But maybe that's only the people that go to UFO conferences. Maybe people out there that would never go to a UFO conference, maybe it's many more. So you're right. It could be 1 in, 50 or 1 in 100. Who knows?
Yeah, I've asked. I always ask people, did you report it? And almost nobody. I mean, I can count on a couple of hands and feet. Talk to hundreds of people, and almost no one reports it.
Yeah. Well, I didn't. When I had my sighting in, back in 2006, I had no idea that you would report something online. First of all, I just didn't know it existed. And I called the police department because I just didn't know what to do. So, not until I started really looking into this topic did I find out that, there's MUFON and New Fork, and all the other, places you can report. I had no idea.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah,
Me either.
I get it.
I had no idea that this subject was even real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny how one little thing can change your life. Like your friends talking about it all that time ago, or you seeing something, just this one little thing that happened to me totally changed my life. Here I am doing this show and really enjoying it and fascinated by listening to people like yourself talk about, all these strange things that have happened and unexplainable still. I don't know anymore. 460 shows in, I know probably less than I did when I started. I don't know.
I know. I still get shocked.
Yeah.
I'm like with the schoolyard UFOs. That shocked me. I knew about the Rua, Zimbabwe case. I didn't know if there was over 100 of them.
Yeah.
I just did a book on UFOs over drive-in theaters.
Oh, really? I missed that one. Oh, wow. Interesting. How about that?
Yeah.
Well,
I had one case. Turns out there's over 100. Just saying.
Wow. I really enjoyed the when we talked about the schoolyard encounters. That was that one. I got an awful lot of feedback, and people were talking about that for a long time. That is a really good book. A lot of people have really enjoyed that book, and people even like Shane Ryan, the Westall, thought that was a very good book as well. So yeah, nice work you do.
Awesome. Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. That book, I mean, that shocked me when I found out how many cases there were.
Yeah. And just a little recap, when you and I have talked about it prior, I remember asking you the question, why do you think it's children? And I remember you saying something like, they're impressionable, more impressionable and, more open mind than as you get older and you get stuck in a mindset or whatever, it's fringe or whatever.
Yep. So, most of them had never even heard of the term UFOs.
Right. Yeah. That's in the Ariel School encounter in 1994. I remember speaking with Salma Siddiq, and she said, I never heard the word UFO. I never knew anything about them. It was not like they were watching TV there or anything where they could have seen something.
Yeah.
It was just an unheard of situation.
Half of those cases, a full half, are elementary schools. I mean, there's junior high and high schools and a couple of colleges, but mostly elementary schools, and I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yeah, all impressionable. So let's talk about another case another case where I remember something about a school teacher and a 15-foot Mantis.
Yeah. This is such an amazing case. 2006, O'Fallon, Illinois. It's a pretty rural community. And I called the lady Eleanor. She says, please don't use my name. She contacted me because there was an account in one of my other books about the same type of creature she saw, figure. I'm not sure I really like that term creature, but hey, this field suffers from semantic disaster. What are you going to do? But at any rate, she likes to go jogging early in the morning and with her dog outside her home, O'Fallon, Illinois. So she's out there jogging one evening in 2000, or one early morning, 4:30 a.m. Goes down her street, up another street, up a third street, and is coming up to a T intersection. And about 100 feet away, she can see actually her dog noticed it first. Her dog stopped, pricked its ears up, and was looking ahead. So she stopped too, thinking, oh, it's going to be a deer, a fox, a raccoon, something like that, because that often happened when they went jogging. But it wasn't. She saw what she first thought was a man on stilts walking down the center of the street. This is a pretty busy road during the day. No one's there at that hour. And it looked like he had extenders on his arms. And this thing was just booking down the road in 10-foot strides and walks right under the street light there. This is how she knows how tall this thing was. She says, Preston, it was 15 feet tall. And it was a praying mantis. It looked like a walking humanoid praying mantis bug. Very long stick-like limbs, short little arms kind of hooked up towards the front, and gray in color, not completely uniform, sort of mottled. Huge eyes. Its head was bent down and it was sweeping back and forth as if looking for something. That makes me wonder, what's it looking for? Did it drop something? What the heck is going on here? And this thing just is walking down the road at pretty high speed. She stops, watches it walk by, and then you know what she does? She runs after it. That's kind of surprised me. I'd like to think, that would be my reaction, but who knows? She ran after it with her dog, who followed, and gets to the T intersection, and she can see it's still walking down the very center of the road, and it's moving faster than she is when she's jogging. She doesn't want to, sprint after it. It did not appear to see her, so she didn't want to call attention to herself, but she followed it for a short distance, not even a minute, when it turned off into this cornfield, which was, fully growing cornfield, and it disappeared into the darkness in this cornfield, and it was gone. Yep, freaked her out. She says it didn't really scare her so much. I asked her, "Did you go jogging the next day?" She's like, "Yeah, of course I did." I'm like, "Oh, okay, just curious." I asked her, "Well, why do you think it was there? What is there anything in this cornfield, anything in this area at all that might attract a 15-foot tall praying mantis?" She's like, "Not that I can think of. It's a very rural area, lots of farms, fields of corn, wheat, and stuff. A school is nearby." But she said there's one thing, and when she said this, I'm like, "Ooh, this could be something important." She says that she lives 6 miles away, as the crow flies, from Scott Air Force Base. And when she said Scott, I immediately thought of that encounter, which occurred in that area, Scott Air Force Base, in the year 2000, I think it was, where you may remember a bunch of police officers saw it in different counties, and they basically tracked it, halfway across the state. Went right by Scott Air Force Base, which they denied, by the way. But that I thought was kind of interesting, and she thought perhaps that might have something to do with it. I do know Air Force bases attract UFOs, so maybe she did some digging herself. Did find another encounter about 40 miles away involving a gentleman who was out late at night, saw a praying mantis crossing the road in front of him. It was on all fours, is how he described it. So he couldn't really tell how tall it was, 15 foot or whatever. I usually hear like 9 feet tall, thereabouts, 6 feet. Only once have I heard anyone describe 15 foot tall, and that was from a great witness, a Navy medic, Kevin Kamen. When he told me 15 feet tall, I'm like, "Are you sure?" He's like, "Listen, I was right up next to this thing. It touched him, grabbed his shoulder." And he said it was more than twice his height. He's almost 6 feet. He said it was like looking up at a basketball, board, a hoop. It was gigantic. And she's sure it was 15 feet tall because she could measure it against the streetlight. She went there the next day and looked at it.
When you get such a bizarre story like that, how do you vet a story when there's when it's one witness? That's a tough one. I know this is a school teacher, someone you think would be a credible person to begin with, but I mean that's such a bizarre story. I mean, is it difficult for you to interview someone like that and take their word for such a bizarre, wacky story? I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but
yeah, no, I get it. Because I get a lot of people contacting me with crazy stories, and what I often do is will ask them to give me a written account, which she did. Talk to them audibly, do a sort of informal interview initially, and then a formal interview, see if their story changes. Get not corroborating witnesses, but what's the word I'm looking for? People who can vouch for her integrity. She told nobody. She told only her immediate family. She insisted upon anonymity. She wasn't looking for any attention at all. She was very nervous about, that being exposed. There's all these little things you kind of look for. She was pretty emotional about it. And the details she described are things that I've heard from other witnesses who've talked about this. They talk about how really thin and stick-like the limbs are, the way that front arms are hooked in front of each other like a sort of dog begging.
Yeah.
The gigantic size of the eyes, the way it moves in kind of a twitchy manner. There's little details that sort of speak towards their credibility. But ultimately, without physical evidence, you can't really prove these cases.
Yeah, that's such a bizarre one. In particular, something that tall and walking down the street. I mean, it seems like something you'd just be afraid that it would just reach down and bite you in half. Something.
Yeah. I asked her more. Because often when someone sees something that close, I feel like the ETs are showing themselves to that person, or it's like usually a part of a what I call it, a conglomeration or a complex of more encounters. I mean, it's a continuum, and she gave me the impression at first that it was a one-off, a singular event. But I'm like talking to her. I'm like, okay, do you mind if I ask you a few more questions? And she was absolutely open to it. And I asked her about her childhood. And I'm like, did you have anything strange happen to you when you were a child? Anything you would consider unexplained? Very open-ended. I don't say, were you visited by aliens? I just want to know anything that you couldn't explain. And she said, well, yeah, actually. Funny you mentioned that. And as she started to talk, I'm like, oh, here we go again. She started talking about how very short, sort of dark, short figures would enter her room in the wee hours of the morning, late at night, and surround her bed. She said it was very scary. It'd happen over and over again. She'd scream, call for her parents. They'd come running in. Nothing, of course, would be there. But it happened over and over again, so many times that her parents became angry with her, told her to stop making stories. You're having nightmares. Don't wake us up anymore. Which breaks my heart, because these kids, I hear this all the time. Children are pretty much on their own often when dealing with these first contact situations. And she had an experience where she woke up once and she wasn't in her bedroom. This is still when she's a little girl, 4, 5, 6 years old. She was in a rounded room on a table. It was metallic. She looks to her right. She sees metallic instruments. She says it felt like she was in a doctor's office. Couldn't see what these beings looked like because they were just sort of silhouettes, other than that they were very short and moving about quite quickly. And little details that I've heard many times. So yeah, she shows all the markers of being an abductee. She had later sightings. And here's a really strange aspect to her case. Twice, she saw what I can only guess is a hybrid being in a public place. Like once at I believe it was a Sam's Club. What do you call it? Not a department store, but along those lines, like Target.
Yep.
And didn't want to stare, but finally turns around and looks at this figure, and it's bald. It's got huge, dark eyes, little spriggles of hair is how she's described it. Big head. Was looking at her, and she quickly looks away and looks back, and it's gone. Gone in a way that should not have been possible. It moved away that quickly or just disappeared. But yeah, that was interesting because I have heard of this before. People seeing weird figures in places, public places where they should not be. It's very strange.
Yeah. Yeah. This question up, I'm putting this up. Is this something you know about? Can you expand on the latest video about the new Malmstrom base UFO witness? Do you know anything about that in particular?
Yeah. This is one of the chapters in the book.
Oh, it is. Pardon me. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is
if you would, sure.
a good segue.
Yeah.
This shocked me actually when this guy, Mel Hansen is his name, contacted me. I had actually reached out to a couple of researchers and radio stations and got the runaround, which surprised me, but found me. I'm really glad he did. I'm sure you've heard of the Malmstrom incident.
Oh, yeah.
1967, Malmstrom
Is
Air
that
Force
the one
Base.
with Robert Salas?
Exactly. Yeah. He was the first whistleblower to reveal that UFOs hovered over Malmstrom. This was in March of 1967, late at night, and shut down almost 20 of the ICBM nuclear missiles.
Yeah.
Boom, 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 boom. Shut them down. And he located other witnesses, eventually put out went public in 94, put out a book in 2005. And Mel Hansen, the guy I talked to, his daughter was watching TV in 2015 and saw a report on this case on the Discovery Channel and immediately called her dad because he had told her his story of his participation in this incident. She's like, Dad, your story is on TV. He's like, wow, I guess I can talk about it. And so he searched for a researcher, found me, and told me this incredible story. He was 77 years old in 2015. He was really eager to get his story told. And told me how he was, I think, 29 years old at the time at Malmstrom, and was actually at one of the missile sites, which is pretty rural. I mean, it's right off the edge, the outskirts of Malmstrom base itself, out in pretty much wilderness area. And they were just doing routine maintenance, he and his crew. And he said it was a really eerie night, very quiet, wasn't a lot of animal sounds. It was unusual. And suddenly this dark shape approaches overhead. And he can't really see it. It's got no lights on it. It's just blocking out the stars, this huge sort of roundish shape. And it's fairly low. He can't tell how low exactly, but it's clearly very low and very large, and stops right over the actual missile site. And it's totally silent. And he's just looking up at it. The security guys he was with immediately called the base and said, "We got something here over the missile." And they're like, "Okay, we'll send out a Jeep. We'll send out a crew. It's going to take us an hour, but we're on our way. And stay in the Jeep. Do not go outside." This is what they told Mel. So he's just watching this thing from the Jeep for a long time. And finally, curiosity gets the best of him. He gets outside and looks at this thing, at which point the missile shuts down. And at this point, there's fail safes to make it go back online. And the fail safe worked. It went back onto the diesel power generator and went back online. And it was moments later, actually right after he got out, that it failed again and went on battery power and went online again, and then failed again the third time. And this time there was no other fail safe. It was shut down for good. And at some point the security team arrived and ordered them to go back to the base. And he was given a briefing the next day to not talk about this to anyone or you will lose your job. And they did, in fact, ship him off back to Hill Air Force Base in Utah. But yeah, an amazing case. He absolutely verified what Robert Salas initially, he was the first whistleblower. There's now several witnesses who have come forward. And I was just amazed to hear his story.
Really something. When those, I can't remember what you say, 20 some odd warheads went down, the most incredible part of that whole thing is they're all independent from each other. In other words, there's nothing that could be shut down as a unit in any type of way. They all
Exactly.
acted
Yeah.
independent.
Yeah, and they're quite distant from each other. And there was an Air Force investigation and a cover-up, but now researchers have located documents verifying that the missiles were shut down. But the Air Force scrubbed any mention of UFOs out of these documents. They're still denying it happened. But it's not unique. I mean, this happened in South Dakota. This happened in Russia. I mean, look at Rendlesham. That's where we stored anything nuclear. These guys are on it. This is clearly, I mean, in my mind, I'm speculating, obviously, but this is clearly a warning or a message. Like, what are you doing with nuclear weapons? This is the number one message, or certainly one of the most common messages given to contactees. People are taken on board over and over and over again, are told, what are you doing with these nuclear weapons? Are you crazy? You're going to kill yourselves. You're damaging areas that you aren't even aware of in other dimensions. So yeah, this is a big, big thing for the ETs. They're very concerned, clearly.
I've talked about a number of times on this show where before I was really looking into this topic very seriously at all, I had an insurance agent in the 1990s, somewhere, I want to say in the beginning of the 1990s. And he told me that he was in the Special Forces Navy that investigated UFOs in Vietnam. I remember him telling me that. It kind of blew my mind. But one of the things he said is whatever they are, they're very, very interested in our nuclear weapons and power anywhere. He told me that at the same time.
Yep.
And I remember.
I've got other cases like that. Dr. Gary Wagoner was a Navy officer on the USS Long Beach, guided nuclear-powered missile cruiser. They had an encounter. Talked to Ray Sachs, an electrician's mate on the USS Clamagore, which in 1971 was carrying nuclear-tipped torpedoes. They had a USO come right up alongside their submarine. I mean, right alongside it. This is not something other submarines would ever do. And did not appear in sonar, but Ray saw it. So did the commander, the second in command, the other watch officer, and all the high-ranking officers came up on deck. The submarine was, on the surface, and they saw it too. It paced their submarine for 15 minutes. These things are watching over anything nuclear. The Indian Point Nuclear Power Station in upstate New York, that was visited. And one other case I'd just love to mention is the Carnes City uranium mine. I did a study of UFOs hovering over mines or landing even, or affecting any kind of mines, iron mines, copper mines, you name it. But Carnes City had a uranium mine, and a UFO hovered right over it, sent down beams of light, really affected the workers there. Some of them were weeping. They were so shocked by what they were seeing. And when they finally dug down to this uranium deposit, it was completely depleted, turned just chalk white. So another clear message.
That's right. Really, really fascinating. Yeah, that I know Robert Hastings does a lot of work on that, and eventually he's going to be dropping out. And I hope someone picks up the torch and keeps moving ahead with doing those investigations on that whole thing. We are going to go into break, and it's a 3.5 minute break. And for those of you over at KGRA Radio, you will hear commercials over there and everywhere else. We are going to play a clip that I did with Stanton Friedman. This happened right after the New York Times article back in 2017 came out. It was the week after. So here's just a little clip. And remember, at KGRA Radio, we'll be right back right after these messages.
Why would aliens come here? It's not a game. We have a long history on this planet of beings from one place, one country, giving a hard time to beings from another country. And so we see that all the time. We have aliens coming here who you expect them to, land on a White House lawn? This is the first time in recent history, as far as we know, that we've been in a real position to say, if we want to go to the stars, we can. And turn that around. What do you think the aliens think about that? They would be concerned as all get out about us. Our track record is terrible. We keep forgetting that. We're nice guys. Everybody knows that. Well, we're not.
Well, we have no way to tell whether they're nice guys like us either.
They haven't attacked us yet, though.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying we know what the future holds, whether they're going to give us another year and say, we've given them enough time, forget about it, wipe it out. We don't know. But you can make a case that if you have a sufficiently advanced civilization, that it knows some history about its own beings in the neighborhood, that they've decided that getting along is better than throwing H-bombs at each other, don't you think?
Right.
At some point, you've got to make that decision. Because if you don't, we are going to be throwing H-bombs, and we're going to be gone. So I'm a rationalist. I think the aliens are going to act sensibly. And I'm particularly intrigued by the times that they have showed up near nuclear weapons testing.
Right.
Near nuclear installations. And it's not because I'm a nuclear physicist, but nuclear energy gives us a means to go out there and bother them. And if I were an alien, I'd be very worried about that. As long as we were stuck on our own planet, I can see where the aliens say, let the kids play their silly games. But as soon as you say they've exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons, which we have, suddenly the whole local neighborhood is within reach. And that's one thing that has really changed since I began work in ufology. Our concept of how many planets there are and how many, are in the neighborhood has changed drastically. Frank Drake said not too many years ago there might be as many as 8,000 planets out there. Now we're talking 8 billion.
It's probably a lot more.
The ball game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's the limit. At least 8 billion in our own little galaxy. So what I'm saying is our status, we are guaranteed. I can't believe we're not of concern to others in the galaxy.
Stand by. Coming back in 3, 2, 1, go.
All right. Welcome back to the show. My guest is Preston Dennett. And wasn't that fitting? I picked that clip halfway through the week for this commercial from the interview I did back in 2017. Late 2017. And anyway, it just kind of dovetailed perfectly with what we were talking about when we went into break. Isn't that something?
Synchronicity.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So there was there has been, like you mentioned, so many cases. I know there was also this object that was seen right over the where the exchange water would come. You know how they go out sometimes like a mile out from a nuclear power plant. They have that water exchange out there. And there was one hovering right over where the water was being exchanged. I remember hearing that particular nuke plant type of thing way back. It makes you wonder about every bit of it,
They're keeping tabs of our technology for sure, at the very least.
Yeah. And, the nuclear waste is the worst part of nuclear power. I mean, that's something that has to be guarded for thousands and thousands of years, up to 200,000 years, for our quick little use of it in 100-year span. It's crazy. So, maybe they are, hopefully, that we'll get the message a little bit when it comes to that.
I hope so. Yeah, the Malmstrom case isn't unique, like I said.
Yeah. Now there was another great question that came up here, but I do want to tell people, remind remind the people in the chat, when you want to ask a question, please put it in all caps so it stands out and I can quickly get to it. And let's talk about another. I guess I'm going to have to ask you. One is, I know that you said the USO case was kind of one of the most wild ones, and it really is crazy. What was some of the other ones? Or let's talk about another case that you really looked into that was fascinating to you.
That's the only USO case in that book, though I did,
I mean other cases in the book is what I meant.
Yeah,
that were fascinating.
Oh gosh, there's so many fascinating cases. One I find very interesting was this couple from Canada who contacted me after reaching a number of other researchers who they weren't happy with. They found me. It's always my first sort of duty, my goal to help people. But that's what I really try to do first. And if they want to share their story later, that's fine. But I talk to a lot of people whose stories, they just don't want to go public, which is totally fine. This couple did eventually agree to an interview. But in 2006, they had a very interesting thing happen. They had just moved to a small town in Canada. She was originally from Europe and was having a little bit of trouble with citizenship status. They had a new house that needed repairs. Had just settled into a new job. They were starting a business. They had a lot going on when they became pregnant. And this was kind of an unplanned pregnancy, but they were, of course, delighted. Their first baby. And it proceeded naturally. Everything was great. They got a midwife. They wanted to have a natural pregnancy, but they did go to the doctor, verified the pregnancy. They sent me the doctor reports and the midwife reports. And just, started to hear the baby's heartbeat. I think it was like around 4 months or so. Like her belly grew. Blood tests confirmed this. Went to the doctor, heard the baby's heartbeat several times, and it was about 7 months into the pregnancy that they were driving to a friend's house who lived about an hour away. And next thing they know, they got disoriented, and they're arriving at their friend's house early. Like they couldn't tell how, what exactly happened. But they arrived like 20 minutes earlier than they thought they should have. They were really confused by that, didn't know what to make of it, never really thought anything of it though, until they were 7.5 months along in the pregnancy, and they woke up one evening to this electrical storm over their house. It was like right over their house. He jumps up to shut the window because the lightning is just super intense. And as he's closing the window, he sees this bolt of lightning like go horizontal right in front of him, right outside the window. Completely freaked him out. Slams the window closed, jumps back into bed. They're pretty much, the adrenaline's pumping because this is a big storm. And strangely, that's all they remember. They both immediately fell asleep. They thought that was kind of strange. Woke up the next morning, and she's like, they both felt groggy, a little bit out of it. And she says, honey, I don't feel pregnant. And he's like, don't be ridiculous. What are you talking about? She says, look at my stomach. It's not as big. And he had to agree that, yeah, it looked like she had shrunk down a little bit. At that time, their baby was in a breech position, and their midwife had been giving them exercises to sort of encourage the baby to move into a better position. And they thought, maybe that's what's going on here. But she's like, no, honey, I don't feel pregnant. I think we should go to the doctor. They had an appointment, I think it was 3 or 4 days after that, but they decided to move it up. They were going to get an ultrasound. And they went to the doctor, and the doctor couldn't find a heartbeat, did tests, and she was no longer pregnant. She says, I'm really sorry, you're not pregnant. I'm like, what are you talking about? Of course we're pregnant. I mean, the tests confirmed it. You heard the heartbeat yourself. He's like, yeah, I know. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. There must have been a misdiagnosis. There might be disciplinary action taken here. We have no explanation. Did you pass any tissue? Did you spontaneously abort? She's like, no. She denied that. She didn't. She didn't notice any marks on her body or anything other than I think there was a mark on the bottom of her foot. And they didn't know what to make of it, but they were not pregnant anymore.
Did they do a sonogram?
I believe so. Yeah, they took full-on tests and no evidence of the baby. But there was still evidence that she was pregnant. Her belly was still, somewhat enlarged. And I started asking more questions. I'm like, do you have any history of UFO encounters? Because they had done a long search to figure out how could a baby just disappear? And they eventually came upon the subject of, the missing fetus syndrome, which is a thing in this field, as I'm sure you know. I've talked to a number of people who've had this happen to them. It's not uncommon, even. I would say pretty much every book I've written about people who are having major encounters, there's a case like this. But usually it's maybe 3 months in, never 7.5 months. But they told me, yeah, we both have a history of encounters. He had seen UFOs earlier, as had his father. And she also is really into psychic powers and stuff. Her dad was a famous psychical researcher in Europe. And she says that she's visited by light beings, what she calls glowing figures, in her bedroom on and off throughout her life. This has happened to her. And so that was a red flag for me. This is something that, I kind of expected, that there was a history of UFO encounters here. And they were, of course, devastated. They cried and were pretty upset about it. But she actually came to grips with this pretty quickly. She said, I'm actually not that upset. I just know, I know that my baby is still alive. I can feel it. He's in good hands. He's out there somewhere. And they think their baby is with the ETs now. And he had a harder time with it than she did. And they had to tell both their whole family. They had built a nursery, painted it, got cribs, the whole deal. Had a baby shower, and had to tell both sets of their parents and their whole family, some of who were very religious, what happened. And they didn't hold back. They said, hey, we believe aliens took our baby. And people reacted in their own different ways, but they eventually came to terms with it. Yeah, it's an amazing case.
Wow. In a case like that, you would almost think that, I don't know, that medical research would be done or something if they actually had like physical evidence that there was a baby and then no baby passed at 7 months. It's going to be a major thing at 7 months. You know what I mean? So
yeah. Oh, the doctors were freaked out. They're like, please come back. If you ever get pregnant, you're first in line, which kind of shocked them because they were having a lot of trouble getting medical care. And now suddenly they're like being invited back and like, please come back. So they thought that was significant. The doctors were very, very interested in what had happened to them.
Did you already talk about like a government whistleblower? Was that one of them?
Yeah, this is a really interesting case, which I have not talked about yet. I was hoping I would get to mention this too, because this was a guy who contacted me. He was a government subcontractor and often went to military bases in a civilian capacity. But in the late 1980s, he was invited to do a project at Edwards Air Force Base. And when he mentioned Edwards, my ears immediately pricked up because, if you know Edwards, they're neck deep involved in UFOs, sightings, landings. The Eisenhower meeting, I'm sure you've heard of that, or the Gordon Cooper landing on the runway, which was actually filmed. Lots and lots of sightings.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Crash retrieval reports, reverse engineering reports. It's just neck deep. And so this guy contacts me because he had this experience at Edwards. He had called to his employer to do some contracting work. And they're walking by this, a hangar. And the hangar has this big window open. And he could hear this loud thrumming noise, this sort of deep, that bass sound, just this kind of woo 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 sound, and turns and looks and gets a real shock because through the window here he can see what looks like a UFO, bright, shiny, chrome, silver object about the size of a Honda Accord, is how he described it. A tiny little sports car type deal. No windows, nothing on it, no markings, but it's floating. It's floating in the air. There are cables attached to it, but it does appear to be floating. And he's super impressed. I mean, it's clearly unusual. And he turns to his employer and says, "What the heck is that?" And his employer glances and turns white as a sheet and jams his index finger against his lips and says, "Shut up." Didn't say anything, but made it clear that he did not want to discuss it and would absolutely said, "Don't say a word," and continued walking as fast as he could without, running. And afterwards, after they were, out of view of this thing, the guy I talked to does not want his name used. He actually contacted me from the hospital on his deathbed. This is a deathbed confession. And asked him again, what was that thing? And his employer absolutely refused to discuss it and would not tell him what it was for over a year, until this same employer calls the guy I interviewed back and says, "I have another job for you. Would you mind doing it? I can't find anybody else. We need you bad." And the guy I talked to says, "Nope, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to do it unless you tell me what we saw in that hangar." And the guy's like, "I can't tell you." He says, "Then I can't help you. I'm not going to do it." And so they got into what he's called a, sort of a joking pissing contest. And after a few beers, convinced his employer to tell him what they saw. And his employer said that what he saw was part of the, quote, failed Star Wars program, or what would become that, and said it was not a UFO, but it was a craft that had been built by the U.S. military using reverse engineered extraterrestrial technology, and that it was a craft that used magnetics and gravitational waves to travel. How we described it was that there were counter-rotating magnetic fields that were directed in such a way that it caused sort of a hole or a void to be projected in the desired direction that they wanted this craft to move. So, this is an interesting whistleblower case that when I found it was tied to Edwards, I'm like, wow.
Right. So many things that's been, like you said, the crux of so many UFO stories in particular. Amazing.
Yep. It makes you wonder just how many cases we haven't heard about.
Exactly. Right. There was a lot of people in chat were mentioning something early on in the chat about healing. And is that one of those stories that's in your book, right?
Yeah. I did write a complete book about this, the healing power of UFOs, with 300 odd cases from all over the world.
Yep.
This is absolutely primary ET agenda. I'm not speculating here. This is absolutely backed up by firsthand evidence, some really good hard evidence, in fact. And I can say confidently that pretty much, I won't say every, but most major researchers have cases like these. Seriously. Bud Hopkins had cases. I cornered him at a conference. John Mack, of course, talked about it. David Jacobs, Barbara Lamb, Yvonne Smith, Edith Fiore, Ray Hernandez. They all have healing cases. And I still get cases coming my way. One case is in the book involving a gentleman by the name of Dudley Delaney. He himself is a nurse and an alternative healer. It didn't surprise me a bit. A lot of the people who are being healed are people who are doctors, they're teachers, they're social rights activists, they're animal rights activists, inventors, artists. They're people who are doing good work for humanity in some capacity. So when he told me that he was a doctor, I'm like, wow, here's this pattern again. UFOs do track families. People who get healed are often have a history of encounters. But yeah, some are, I mean, a lot of them are doctors. Jacques Vallée has a case involving a doctor. He has multiple cases, by the way. But this case involving Dudley Delaney, he's recently passed away. But, excuse me, he was quite elderly when this case occurred. Has some history of UFO encounters, not a lot. He had a weird incident as a kid. He had once had a beam of light come through his ceiling, right? I mean, through the ceiling, the solid ceiling, and going around his bedroom. But he was in his late 70s when this weird incident occurred. He was suffering from prostate problems, difficulty urinating, and all of the, symptoms that come along with a swollen prostate. And woke up to find a figure in his room. Next thing he knows, he's not in his room. He's in this other place, presumably aboard a craft, because he gave that sort of description I hear quite a bit. Rounded walls, very bright. Said this figure did not look human, had what he described as sort of a misshapen face, wasn't particularly attractive, large dark eyes. And he talked to it. He's like, who are you? He said, my name is June. He had the impression this was a male figure, and had Dudley lie on his side in sort of a curled up position, and proceeded to probe him, give him, the classic anal probe. Told him that he had a tumor. Dudley was not aware of this. He was aware that he was having problems, but did not think there was a tumor. But this is what this figure told him, and proceeded to, insert this probe, at which point he could feel energy coming from it, the sort of vibration. And he said it wasn't unpleasant, it wasn't painful, it wasn't even scary, just very, very unusual. He felt a very friendly, benevolent sort of intention from this ET. I'll call it an ET. And it was actually a really brief encounter. That's pretty much all he remembers, except waking up the next morning feeling pretty good, and had no problems urinating after that. His prostate problems subsided very quickly, and never returned. So he believes that he was healed.
Wow, that's a bizarre one, and yeah.
Yeah, why would they cure an elderly man? I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's because he's a doctor and was really into alternative healing, which is something I hear quite a bit. And
Oh,
I
wow.
did some more questioning. And yeah, he had some unusual encounters as a kid. Also, this might be significant. My niece is having encounters, and I'm like,
That's
oh
what he
yeah,
said. Yeah. Mhm.
yep.
Huh. How about that? Someone, this gentleman or person, I don't understand the name. I'm sorry. Do you ever look into a blood type pattern like RH, negative and stuff like that for these people? Do you ever ask that question when you talk to someone, when they talk about encounters?
Yeah. And some people do know their blood type, but a lot don't.
Yeah.
So they can't tell me. But I have not found a pattern there. I mean, some people are like, yeah, I'm RH negative. And they're like, saying that could be a factor. And I think possibly it is. But I have to tell you, I've talked to people from all over the world of all different races. I mean, Pacific Islanders, people who are, Latino, Black, Asian, from across Europe, all across the US, people of all different races, which pretty much shows that ETs don't discriminate in that way. I've even asked people, what's your political affiliation? How old? It's evenly divided between men and women in my own files. Age is not a factor. It's not religion. It's not political affiliation. The only factor I could find was it does track families. That is absolutely for sure. I'm going to say it. Over 50% of the people I've talked to have a history of encounters, not only with themselves, but with some family member, whether it's an uncle, a parent, a grandparent, often their children. So that's absolutely a factor. And the only other, well, sometimes if you live in a UFO hotspot, that can increase your chances.
Mhm.
Or if you're out, driving on a desert highway late at night, some people have described what I would call a one-off, just because I think they were in the right place at the right time,
Yeah.
wrong place, however you describe. But other than that, it's profession. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of police officers, a lot of doctors, a lot of teachers, a lot of human rights activists. It's really quite astonishing how many times I hear, social workers and this sort of thing describing encounters.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I have a friend that's a social worker that actually had an encounter when she was younger, not during, while she was a social worker. But
Yeah, one
there was
lady,
what's that?
real quick, one lady contacted me from Norway. She had a one-off. She had Grays come into her house, flipped her around. She was sleeping, flipped her around, put her in her bed like a rag doll, she said. It was really scary. They weren't answering any of her questions. It's quite frightening for her. These were just typical Grays. Put an instrument against her back. She could feel this energy pulsing through her and filed out through the wall and took off. It was a 1 minute long encounter. And I'm like, oh, interesting. She says, you know what? They healed my back. She had suffered from a severe back injury and they healed her. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. What do you do for a living? She says, well, I'm a retired graphic artist, but please don't use my name because I'm very active in my country doing animal rights activists. I'm like, oop, there's that pattern. There it is again. I'm telling you, this, I think, speaks towards their agenda. This is why I don't think they're, quote, demonic or evil. One of the many reasons, actually, because they are helping people who are helping others.
But you do hear some cases where people think there's, something not so good happens to them, in these encounters.
Yeah, there's a bell curve for sure. I've interviewed people who are not happy campers. They wish this had never happened to them. They've suffered injuries. They've got PTSD. But more often, they come. People will sort of get over the fear and start having really benevolent encounters. And most people, I would say, lean towards the positive side. But no, it's not all puppies and rainbows by any means. It's a wide universe, and some people do have negative encounters for sure.
I'm going to open the lines now. So for those of you that would like to actually call in and ask our guest a question, that phone number is 855-472-5483. And I'd like to ask you, Preston, going back to the couple that lost the 7-month-old. I don't know if you followed up with them after that, but I'm just wondering if, they think they encountered something that night. Have they ever tried anything like regression hypnotherapy? And I know that's not always the answer, but I'm just wondering, have they tried to attempt to find out what occurred that night that they weren't aware of?
No, as far as I know, they haven't. I still do have their contact information, and I reached out to them, before the book was published, as I did with all the witnesses, to see if there had been any development, and they did not respond. And I don't want to, this is a delicate thing for witnesses. Sometimes they just don't want to talk about it, even after giving an interview. And they were very adamant about not having their identity revealed. So I wasn't able to follow up on, because I really wanted to know if they, ever had kids, what happened after all of this.
Right.
Right. But as far as I know, just from, researching sort of circuitously, they're fine. They're doing well. I do remember following this incident. He called me back, the husband, because his wife was missing, just gone.
Well,
I'm like, and he was, pretty upset. He's crying. He's like, "Oh my God, I think the aliens took her." I'm like, "Calm down, tell me what happened." He says, "Well, we had a fight, and she ran out. She's gone. She's missing." I'm like, "Oh, you had a fight? Okay, well, let's not jump to conclusions. She may be just cooling off."
Yeah, that's right.
And he called me back, super apologetic. He's like, "I'm so sorry. I'm so embarrassed."
After what happened to him, or seemingly happened to him, I can understand why that happened. So we have a couple callers. We have Josh from North Carolina on the line. Josh, welcome to the show.
Hi, how's it going? I'm really surprised I got through.
Yeah. Hi. Welcome. You got a question for our guest tonight?
Yes, I do. It my first name is Josh.
Hi, Josh. Go on.
Hello? Oh, sorry. It's Josh, by the way. Sorry.
Yes, Josh. Welcome to the show. Go on and ask your question if you would.
All right. My question is: do you think the famous Zimbabwe incident could that have been a message that they were really trying to send us, like a warning as to where we're, where we're at as humanity and the way we're treating our planet? And my other following question is, do you think that it could possibly be an off switch for us if we get to the point where there's no turning back?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I love these questions. The Ariel case I've looked into in depth, as well as other cases like it. And yeah, that is a clear message. I think on one level, it's sort of a, hey, hello, we're real. But in that case, they did land. Humanoids came out, at least 3, and did speak with a small group of students telepathically, each of who received messages along the same lines. Mind you, this is in 1994 in a very rural area to elementary age kids who were not what I would call environmentalists or had no real idea of the destruction we're doing to our planet. And that was what these messages said. Emily Trim, she talked about how the aliens told her using imagery that we have become far too technological, that there's a good way to use technology and a bad way, and we could do much better. Another girl was told that we have to stop cutting down our forests, and that if we destroy our forests, many, many people will die. Another person was given warnings about pollution. So these were all along the same lines, warnings about our environment and how we're treating our planet, which doesn't surprise me. This turns up in other cases, certainly with contactees. This is the number one message. It's not just about nuclear proliferation, but definitely about pollution and our warlike ways and treating the environment. So absolutely, I think they were trying to send a message beyond just, hello, we're real, which I think is what they're doing in a lot of these schoolyard cases. But in that case, they're like absolutely giving warnings. And the second part of your question was, what happens if we go too far in the destruction of our planet? I can only speculate, but this has certainly been the number one message from every type of ET, starting from the 1950s onward. I mean, whether you're talking about the contactee era with, Howard Menger and George Adamski and Truman Bethram and Orfeo Angelucci and all these sort of contactees who talked about meeting human-looking friendly ETs, or people who met Greys, like Betty Andreasson or Whitley Strieber, or praying mantis ETs, or strange humanoids of any kind. That is the number one message, is we are on a pathway towards an existential crisis where there could be very large loss of life. Stephen Greer talks about this. Many researchers have cases like these, most. So I think that they, at this point, are still, the ETs are acting in a very laissez-faire kind of way, helping as much as they can without actually taking over. It's up to us to solve our own problems. If they were to come down and, lead for us, that's not going to teach us how to handle ourselves, how to solve our own problems. So I think that's why they haven't actually, stepped in. But if it gets to the point where there's a nuclear exchange or something, or there's bound to be huge loss of life on our planet, it's my understanding, and I've heard this from a number of contactees, that they will step in and will rescue people and take them off planet. And I have some cases that speak towards this. Yeah, my last book, Onboard UFO Encounters, there was a volcanic explosion incident where people were apparently rescued by ETs prior to the volcanic explosion. So yeah, I think they will step in, but I wouldn't count too much on it. We have to solve our own problems.
Yeah, we have to learn as a species. Yeah, that's really, it's really fascinating to me, and I do think that they are definitely trying to, like you said, not interfere to the point where they're taking over, but they're trying to just nudge us in the right direction and hope, that we get our act together. But I personally didn't even believe in this until a few months ago, to be honest, until it started getting on the news, and I went back to an incident I had at the Cape Fear River where my best friend and I were fishing, and we saw what we thought was a bright star in the sky. I assumed it was a planet. It stayed stationary for 30 minutes, and then it curved and took off one direction, did an about face, and shot off in the blink of an eye. And I immediately went to rationalize it. Well, my best friend, asked if I saw it and described exactly what I saw. We never really spoke about it until we were here recently, but now I'm 100% convinced that we saw something out of this world.
I think in cases like that, they're showing themselves intentionally. I really do. Why else would it dart around, stay there for such a long time, and then start putting on this little show? They want to be seen. They're trying to convince people bit by bit.
Excellent. Well, hey, Josh, thanks so much for the call. We got a few other people lined up. I appreciate the call.
Thank you.
All right. And next, we have Danny calling from Ohio. Welcome to the show, Danny.
Hey, how you doing, man?
All right.
Yeah, my name's Danny. I'm from Ohio, and I have a two-part question. We all know, those of us that's been following this forever know that the government knows exactly what crashed where and who was in it and all that.
Yep.
Sometime during the end of the month when we're having the report on the disclosure, do you think that are they gonna roll over and play stupid still, or are they gonna are we gonna get some facts? And if so, if we do get some facts, how do you think everybody's gonna take it?
Yeah, I think you're right. They're gonna roll over and play stupid. That's what I think they're probably going to do, is say, yeah, there's something there, but it could be an artifact on the radar. It could be Russian, Chinese. We don't know what it is what I think they're going to say, which I think, like you said, is completely disingenuous. They know. They've known for 70 or 80 years at least. They know exactly what this is. Anyone with an ounce of sense can look into this in 5 minutes and see that there's something to it and what it is. So I think they do know. I think if they're smart, they will go a little bit farther and use the A word. Say it, aliens. It's not that long of a word. It's not hard to pronounce. You can do it. Say it. They know. And if they don't do that, I think there's going to be kickback from not only the UFO community, the experiencers and investigators, and society at large, which is really waking up to this, but also from government people within this sort of cover-up community, and for that matter, the ETs themselves, who do appear to be pushing towards disclosure. I think that's one of the driving forces behind disclosure, is the ETs are showing themselves in large numbers over and over again, and have been for decades. So it's to the government's benefit to move a little farther than we don't know what's going on. And if they don't, they're gonna regret it. I seriously think so. I think what they might do, if they're smart, they will show us some real photographs, show us a piece of metal. I think it might go as far as that. But the end game is showing us the craft, showing us the bodies, and anything less will not turn society into believers. People will cling to their skepticism. I don't think there'll be panic, though. I think people will just take this in stride.
I agree.
Oh, I don't either. I think it'd be a great new step, actually, for humanity. But I think the Black Ops projects and stuff like that are controlled by the elite, and that's just too powerful a weapon for them to let go of. You know what I mean? It's a too powerful a weapon against us for them to let go of. I think they're going to try and hold on to the secret and strong as they can. That's my own personal belief. But
yeah,
But
well,
yeah,
the government better disclose. They better, or otherwise the ETs will. And if the government wants to remain in control of this, you know, the public's perception of this, or have any control at all, they better do a good job with this disclosure deal. But I don't think they will. I don't trust them. I'm sorry, I'm jaded. They've lied for so long.
it's going to be to the point where it's going to be out of their hands, like it or not. But yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Hey, Danny, thank you for the call.
Hey, thank you so very much.
All right. All right. Now we have Jeff from Indiana. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. Yeah,
Hi. Oh, I'm on.
you're live.
I've been interested in this, but 2012, July 3rd, in the evening, was the first time we ever had an encounter, and we were about 61 years old, my wife and I. And we, all of a sudden, we were just heading home from my daughter's meeting dinner in rural Indiana here. And a couple of these machines appeared, just kind of materialized, like they just came down out of the stratosphere right above a house on our right. We're going about 40 miles an hour down the road, and then they did a 90 after they materialized. They were more or less the orange orbs about the size of a SUV that we were riding in. And they went due north, and we stopped, got out of the car, and continued to watch them go away, you know. And then another one came from behind us about 2 minutes later, and then another one and that come right over the top of us. And so there were 4 crafts now, 2 and a single, and they were all identical, all the orange ones. The 4th one went right over the top of us, and you can see they're engulfed in a plasma field, an orange plasma. And the 4th craft, it went right over us. You could see from underneath, the plasma field wasn't as intense, and you could see the mechanics or the structure of a machine inside. And the main question I have is, after that happened, this was in broad daylight, by the way, too, broad daylight, about 8:30 in the evening. And we continued home, you know, and told our friends, blah, 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 you know. And I was looking quite a bit at night, you know, to see you got an interest, you know, it really changes your life. And, but what I found interesting was, I know this is going to sound bizarre, but I came home one night by accident, and then just before I walked in the house, I opened it. Before I went in the door, I turned around and said, "Okay, you guys out here tonight?" And one appeared. Only it wasn't the orange ones; it's just the white ones, up probably about 700 feet. And I could do this over and over and over. Think about them, and one would appear. My wife could also do the same thing. And we have no recollection of being abducted. Nothing. I've never even had a dream about this. Now, you would think a person would dream about something that grabs you and changes your life like that, but I've never even had a dream about a UFO since that time. But what I was wondering was, they obviously had an interest in my wife and I, because they would appear when we would think about them. I've even done it through the window of the house looking out at the night sky. But we have absolutely not even bits or pieces of or any marks or waking up in the morning, you know, with any problems or anything like that. What do you think would be going on in our case? Anything at all? Or are they just, I think they're just constantly monitoring this planet 360. And I think the stratosphere or the sky is full of them 24/7. Because the odds of looking up and thinking about them and one appears.
Yeah.
Is pretty remote. You know, the sky is full of them. And the second thing it tells you is that they can read your mind. And they always do the same thing. They go right over. They go about 30 degrees off the horizon in the opposite direction they started, and they just blip out. Blip. And I did that over. It became boring. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't prove anything. You know, nothing ever landed. The only way you ever could prove it to yourself what you're dealing with, if they landed in your yard, opened the door and said, "Hey, here we are, and here's what we look like, and this is what we want." but it just, I got to the point where it just became, I don't even look anymore. Last one I saw was last summer in broad daylight, came right over. Then I didn't think about it then. It just happened. You can tell them, they give themselves away immediately because they're moving so slow. And it was just a white light in the middle of the afternoon in broad daylight. And they're moving so slow. You know, an airplane has to maintain at least, I think, 100, whatever it is, some miles an hour, they'll fall out of the sky. There's no wings, there's no tail, there's no sound. That's the most remarkable and grabbing thing. There is absolutely total silence. There's ones that went over us originally, the first 4 that evening were probably 50 feet over our heads. I could have hit them with a rock. And there's absolutely no sound whatsoever. If we wouldn't have looked up or been traveling, we just was standing there, you would have never known it happened. And
Yeah,
so that's my story. I don't know what they want. I don't know if they do want anything with us, but that's what, if you've heard the story before where people could see them at will.
yeah, I certainly have. And when someone has a very close sighting like that, 100 feet away, 50 feet away, that is a red flag. This is something I look for when people are having perhaps missing time, which can be seamless. People can have missing time and not know it. And for that matter, a person can have an extensive encounter and they will bring you right back moments, within moments. You can have a very long 2-hour long encounter or even longer, and they will bring you back within the minute that they took you. They have this way of sort of pulling you out of the time stream. And I know how this must sound to skeptics, but this is for real. Yeah, when someone has a very close sighting, it's a definite sign that there's something going on there. And I've heard many people say exactly what you're saying. Following a really close encounter like this, they have repeated encounters, telepathic contact, and that's what it sounds like. Yeah, it sounds like they're doing with you. They're contacting a lot of people. They want people to know they're real. They want people to know they're here. This is something they're really pushing forth in their agenda. I think this is sort of a prelude to open official contact, so that if they show themselves to enough people, that when they actually come in large numbers, land all over the world or however they're going to do it, we will be better prepared. But yeah, they are. You hit it on the head. They are very telepathic, and you can't call them down.
We've never had any recollection of any telepathic.
It's not unusual to not have dreams or any scars or anything. It's not always, necessary for a person. They just want you to know they're real. It's very possible you have had encounters, but it's buried in your subconscious. I wouldn't recommend hypnosis unless you're having anxieties or you're a clear-cut case of missing time. But what you might do, and this is just an experiment that you might find interesting, is go out there and ask to see them and have them come a little closer, because they will. They will come much closer. They will interact with you. This is something I've heard from many people, and that'll be a little bit more interesting than a sighting. But yeah, it does sound like you're having real contact, because there are sort of 3 factors I look for when someone describes a sighting, and that would be strange appearance, strange motion, and sound. And if all of those 3 factors come into play, and it's a very close-up sighting, that I think lends credence towards this being something unusual.
Well, I came to the conclusion, we told friends, and I talked about it. A lot of people won't talk about it, and I'm the kind of person, I had my own business for 40-some years, and I'm an outgoing person, and I don't care if I see something, I'm going to tell people. And I said, guess what, folks? These things are real. We saw them, we got about as good a look at them as you can in broad daylight. And I tell friends or anybody, I talk to some police officers I know, and they've seen some things, and I've told relatives, and they start looking in the evening because they believe me. And they go, I never see anything. And I said, well, I'm going to tell you what I've come to the conclusion. The only way you're going to see them is if they want you to, because they don't have to show themselves to anybody. I said, if they decide they want to show themselves to you, and when you go out to look, you'll see them. because they're there 24/7 right above you. You don't have to go out in the middle of the desert. You don't have to go to the mountaintop. They're everywhere.
Yeah,
Well, hey,
totally
Jeff,
agree.
Globally.
thank you for the call, Jeff.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Now we have Jake from on the line from Pennsylvania. Welcome to the show, Jake.
Hey, thank you. I have a question. Do you think there's any coincidence with the government rolling out the Space Force and then a few years later the whole UAP phenomenon? I'll take it off air. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the call, Jake.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Jake. Thanks. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think the government, the secret government, I'll call them, has sort of painted themselves into a corner with this subject. There's been a decades-long policy of denying and lying and covering this up, while at the same time it's just mounting, and they're getting deeper and deeper involved with it. And they're at the point where they can't cover it up. The cover-up has been a disaster. It's like a dam, picture a dam with 1 leak, and then 2 leaks, and then 10 leaks, and then 100 leaks. Now they've got all their little fingers over these leaks, and it's impossible. That dam is about to collapse, and it's going to be a flood of information. That's what we're seeing. So I think that's one of the reasons they are sort of trying to prepare. This is, I think, one of the driving forces behind organizing a Space Force. The Space Force is something I think that's inevitable. We started with the Navy, and we've just continually moved on. I think it's part of the whole control factor too. They've really been trying to. I'm just not convinced our government is acting in our best interests. So I'm concerned about this, and I'm wondering, what if the Space Force is just more of the greed and control and corruption and trying to, spin this phenomena into a quote threat. And I think if you look at this objectively, I don't think it is a threat. I think this is good news for humanity. I really do. Again, I'm not saying it's all friendly by any means, but if they really wanted to take over, this was truly a threat, it would be no problem for them to do so, and we haven't seen that.
I don't think the government is going to be able to see technology that can't be explained as anything other than a threat. I think that's where that'll hang right there, because if they can't explain how these things can do what they do, then whoever else has it would seem like a threat to the U.S. government, I think. But anyway, we have John from Indiana. It's our last caller for the night. John, welcome to the show.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
I had a question for Preston.
Sure.
Yeah.
I also wanted to share an experience. I thought it'd be a good time to share my close encounter of the first kind, which correlated with a few synchronous events. November 2nd of last year, 2020, I say a stone's throw and a half away. I probably could have hit it with a baseball. Directly over my head was a giant chevron-shaped vehicle, to where I could see the craft in between the lights. The last thing on my mind was to grab a camera, but I was able to run inside and grab another witness. We watched this thing fly over. After it hung there for a few moments, the physical craft we saw, I'll keep this short, turned into the separate lights. I don't remember if there were 3 or 4 on each side of this V-shaped, a triangle without the bottom. This thing went from physical craft to these lights flying off and disconfiguring and turning to separate lights. So I thought it was interesting. The last caller said the most amazing thing was the silence, which that was amazing. But in my case, the most amazing thing was the nuts and bolts physical craft turned to light. So my question was, all the cases you've come across, Preston, do you know of any cases where they describe the occupants of these particular triangle Phoenix Lights crafts?
Yeah, that's a great question, which I've been asked before. No, I have not been able to sort of match the type of craft to the type of ETs. I do get mostly grays or some variation of grays. I would say human looking after that, and praying mantis, and then strange humanoids of all types. But I can't match it to the type of craft. There's an incredible array of different types of craft. And
yes, in most other craft, there are cases out there. However, this particular one is a little difficult to find info on the occupants.
Yeah, and I've heard that same thing too that you're describing. They'll turn transparent, they'll break apart, they'll release smaller craft, they'll multiply. They can do things that we would think of as interdimensional, and perhaps it is, but I am absolutely convinced that these are extraterrestrials driving solid craft, beings like us, very much like us. In fact,
I didn't, John, thank you for the call. I'm going to have to cut this short. We're running out of time, and I didn't realize there was one other caller waiting on hold. So, but thank you for your call tonight. Right now we have Bonnie from Minnesota on the line. Yeah. Bonnie, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi. Okay, so this is so weird maiden talking to you. Because when I was a kid, and it could have all been my imagination, because I was like 9, and I had a decade older, how to meditate. So I'm in my bedroom, and these 2 people appeared. And I just thought that they were like time travelers, because I just walked up to them and I started talking to them. Only one of them spoke with me. Normal people died. And I thought they were scientists. And anyways, I asked my name, and he asked how old I was. And then it's like he was reading something. And I would have.
All right. Hey, Bonnie. Bonnie. Hi. Pardon me. I'm sorry to have to do this to you, but your phone line, your connection is breaking up, and we're right at the end of our show anyway. But I'm really sorry. I encourage you to call back next week. All right. All right. So, Preston, so thank you so much for being on our show today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it was fun.
Just quickly, we have a minute left here. The upcoming thing you're working on. You must have another book in the works.
I do. You know it. Yeah. It's going to be amazing, about one lady's story who's having full-on conscious contact. It's really quite incredible. She's an amazing woman.
Excellent. All right. Well, Preston's book is called Wondrous, and you can get that on Amazon. It's also in the show notes and will be in the text on YouTube, etc. Thank you so much, Preston. Great as always.
Hey, always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Yeah. All right, everyone. So we'll be back next week with a Zen Benfidel. And don't forget to tune in on July 6th. We're going to be up in the Berkshires, and you don't want to miss that one. So thank you very much, everyone. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.